How did you almost die as a kid? Story 1. Mom fell asleep behind the wheel driving me home from first grade. She mixed her pain meds she got after surgery and alcohol cause she was an alcoholic and missed our turn. I turned and saw her asleep. We lived on a farm and my dad taught me steering on the lawnmower and the basics of his truck. Was able to steer us off the road and turn the car off after we rolled to a stop in the grass. Got a nice trucker to pull over and help wake her up. Story 2. When I was 8 we had steak for dinner. I didn't chew it enough and it got stuck in my throat. My dad jumped up to give me the Heimlich and Mom called 911. I started to get tunnel vision and everything started going dark. Luckily he managed to save my life. Story 3. My friend and I thought it would be a good idea to pretend to act like dogs. We hooked up the dog runner to my neck and I ran full sprint down the hill and it got to the point where there was no more tension on the runner and it yanked me back causing a ginormous cut across my neck. It was bleeding pretty badly and I had to get sticks. The scar was also there for a long time and my mom still says that everywhere we went people would give her dirty looks like WTF is on that child's neck. Story 4. Gramps brought me and my brother cousin to a pond to chill. I was impatient and wanted to go home but he said not yet. My genius 5-year-old self figured I could drive. Without him looking, I opened his 1982 Corolla and moved the shifter to neutral. The car rolled slowly into the pond we were at. My grandpa, after having lost a son to a car decades earlier, now had to watch his grandson possibly die too. He had to choose between going in after me, or pulling out my equally idiotic brother and cousin who ran in after me because they thought it was funny. Fortunately an onlooker saw and was able to open the door and get me out before it got too deep. The car was eventually pulled out as it never was fully submerged, and shockingly ran until a few years ago when it was sold. Story 5. I knocked myself unconscious jumping into a pool. I hit the lining with my jaw and would have drowned if another person wasn't watching me. Remember to never leave kids unsupervised in or near a pool. Story 6. Drowning. My sister was the one drowning and I went to help her. She was freaking out and started pulling me underwater. Some strangers saw us and dragged us to shore. Story 7. When I was 5 years old, I went to a pool party and before I got in I was asked if I knew how to swim. I was too focused on getting into the underground pool, first time seeing one in person. Didn't understand the question, lied and said yes. Went into the pool not knowing there was a deep end, and almost drowned. It went to the floor of the pool maybe 4 times before someone helped me. Before all that happened I ran into the screen door that led to the backyard where the pool was at, so I had 2 embarrassing moments that day. Story 8 was roller skating across the road, fell, couldn't get back up, and the car that frankly should have seen me just kept going. I had to crawl the rest of the way across the street and the car missed me by just a couple of inches. Another time when I was only about 8 years old a couple of teenagers thought it would be funny to take a floating mat and hold it over my head in the pool. I couldn't go up for air because of the mat and the teenagers wouldn't let me swim out from under it. They nearly drowned me but thankfully my mom was watching and nearly skinned them alive for what they were doing. Story 9. Slid off the back of a piano bench and cracked my skull open on the edge of the radiator. Tried to outrun a train. Was pushed down a flight of stairs. Take your pick. Story 10. My dad was building the fireplace onto the house and I was sitting nearby watching TV. No idea why they let me sit so close, or even in the same room at all, but I got too close to the edge and I fell down inside and landed in the wet cement in between all these spikes sticking out of it. I managed to land between the spikes somehow. Story 11. I was 13 and drinking and I shouldn't have been and I passed out in a field and fire ants bit me all over my body and when I came to I was dying for water. Story 12. I almost died a few times throughout my childhood but the 2 I will say is 1. When I was 16 I was walking through a creek and a metal rusty rod went through my leg and I almost bled out running back to the house. 2. When I was 13 a tree almost fell on me. I'm so silly. Story 13. Somewhere around age 9 or 10 maybe 11, neither my little brother nor I were exactly what you'd call strong swimmers. We were at our aunt's place, messing around in her backyard pool. The game was simple. One of us would toss a hair tie into the deep end, watch it drift down, and the other would dive in to get it. We had a system: toss, dive, grab, swim to the edge, latch on, repeat. It worked, until it didn't. Was my brother's turn. He went under and got the hair tie, but he popped straight up instead of heading toward the wall like always. That was new. He started panicking, dog paddling like it owed him money but not getting anywhere. I jumped in, thinking I'd pull him back like some poolside superhero. I grabbed him and tried to swim. I instantly regretted it. We were both in trouble, flailing and sinking like 2 bricks in swim trunks. Our grandma saw us through the kitchen window and ran straight to the sliding door. The next thing we knew she was in the pool, pulling us to the side like it was nothing. We were quiet, embarrassed, clinging to the wall like it might swim away if we let go. The hair tie stayed at the bottom of the pool. We stayed by the edges for the rest of the swim. Game over. My dad used to beat me when I wouldn't answer his questions or lost races. I raced dirt bikes and I got hurt a few times so I didn't want to jump anymore because that was how I got hurt, so he told me head beat my unless I jumped, so I wasn't scared either way and was going to be in pain no matter what unless I won. Story 14. Drowning. Floated on a basketball in the 9 feet then slipped and fell off it. No lifeguard on duty, but luckily my aunt saw me and pulled me out. Life flashed before my eyes and everything. 9 years old and I'll never forget. Story 15. Drowning. My brother was supposed to be watching me but didn't. I decided I wanted to be a big boy so I got out of the water onto the back deck of the houseboat where I took off my life jacket and grabbed the handles on one of the orange rescue square, turned around and hopped into the water. As soon as I hit the water, I lost my grip on the handles, and just couldn't get to the surface. I'm not sure how much time passes, but when my parents didn't see or hear me, it was my brother that noticed the little brown blob a few yards from the boat. I was in a dead man's float. I saw everything from a third-person view as my mother furiously swam to get me while screaming at my dad to help as he was putting down the ladder so they could get me on the boat. CPR was administered to my lifeless body, and I came back to consciousness on the back of the boat. I spent the entire night coughing up and vomiting lake water. Another time I was home alone and choked on a high-C hard candy that shot down my throat as I put it in my mouth. I was panicking but somehow remembered what I had read in a Boy Scout book that you can give yourself the Heimlich. As all of our dinner table chairs had round tops, I quickly ran to the sink, raised myself as high as I could, and then thrust myself with all my force onto the edge of the counter. I honestly don't recall if I had to do it more than once, but I do remember even my pet frantically circling my head, clearing, sensing my panic. The candy shot out like a bullet, and I threw the rest of those candies in the trash can. Story 16. My age 6. Thought I could walk on water if I put arm floaties around my ankles. I got in the water and immediately flipped upside down. I was struggling underwater for a while but got myself up and out without anyone noticing. Story 17. My father didn't act in a thoughtful and protective manner. He was drinking beer on the beach and just let a 3-year-old in the Pacific Ocean for wading and fun, but sat on the shore. I got sucked out and washed away and basically fought my way back to the waterline. He says, "I saw you get taken out there. Well, like Taff bro, you don't run out and grab me." Needless to say, as a mother, my children are never in the ocean without me knee-deep or greater, and holding on to small ones. Story 18. The car door popped open while Mom was turning. I flew out into the road right in front of a dump truck. Luckily, he missed me and I survived with some scrapes and bruises. Wear your seatbelts, everyone. Story 19. Once when it was a really bad snowstorm, our car had went half off the road, where there was a hill that pretty much just dropped straight down. At that point, any movement could have killed us. I don't even remember how we got back on the road. I just remember being terrified and staying still. Another time I was on a merry-go-round and spinning pretty quickly. While I had a lollipop, it got lodged in my throat and it took me what felt like forever to finally get it out. Story 20. Got trapped under a water gate. I was alone and just barely managed to pull myself out before I started breathing in water. I think I was 8 at the time. Story 21. Penicillin reaction at 4 years old. I have no memory of it apart from asking my mom when I was taking the yummy pink medicine again, and she looked at me kinda haunted-like and said I can't have that anymore. A couple years later, I was living with my dad. His girlfriend wanted to set up doctor's appointments for us and asked if we had any allergies. I told her I'm allergic to penicillin. I can spell it if you don't know how because my mom pointedly taught me to spell it just in case I ever needed to. She mentioned it to my dad later, and he told her I was lying and had no allergies. Luckily she has a brain, and asked why would a kid lie about this, let alone know what it is. Why would a 6-year-old know how to spell penicillin? He repeated that I was just a liar and not to trust me. She found that very odd, called my mom to confirm the truth, and screamed at him for forgetting his kid had nearly died a couple years before. So while my technical almost death was due to the allergy, I think my father's forgetting about it was probably more dangerous. As an adult I don't feel so certain he actually forgot it all. TBH, we do not speak. Story 22. Drowning. I swam under a large inflatable raft with my mom and friend laying in it. In my head I thought I could go under it and flip them over. The water was quite shallow and somehow I got wedged between the raft and the sand of the river. I barely squeezed my way out from beneath of their combined weight. Well over 30 years later, and it still haunts my memories. Story 23. Putting coins on the train track. I all of a sudden wondered why the coins began to dance. I stood up, turned around, and the train was at full speed towards me, maybe 50 meters away. In that same second it let out a blaring honk and the sight and sound of it petrified me. I managed to tilt over in my frozen state and avoid the hit. Probably 9 years old. Story 24. Mom was using lawnmower on the front yard. I was outside playing, and the mower picked up a fist-sized rock, somehow maybe a bit smaller, and it zipped past my face just barely a centimeter away from my noggin. Story 25. Drowning. Was walking in the woods with family and ran up to a stream, slipped on a rock and went straight in. Parents didn't see what had happened at first but managed to get me out. Was also nearly abducted on the street. Was aged about 9 or 10 and was at the shops with my mum, who was talking to some friend of hers she'd run into. A guy in his car called me over and started asking me for directions and then asked me to get in so I could show him on a map. He opened the door and then my mum noticed what was happening, grabbed me back and started screaming at the guy who then drove off. She reported it to the police but I can't remember anything happening after that. Story 26. Went whitewater rafting when I was in middle school. I think it was level 3 or level 4, part of the run-through got full-on knocked out of the raft. Hit a rock, Dad jumped in after me, didn't drown, but probably would have as it was crazy area of water. Story 27. Probably loads of ways, potentially. A swim instructor threw me into the deep end of a pool when I probably wasn't even old enough to go to school. I had nightmares about drowning almost my whole childhood and didn't make the connection because it happened when I was so little. A lot of my childhood felt completely unsupervised. I'd play alone. I'm guessing on the island my grandparents had a cottage and was told to avoid the berry patch to avoid running into bears. This was before I can clearly remember. I used to canoe alone down a river and through lakes. We'd play in construction sites as children. Toboggan down hills into a frozen creek. I climbed up a tree behind our house and then couldn't get down. I was 2 stories up. I managed to shimmy down partway and jumped out and effed up my knee or hip and said nothing about it. I got so dehydrated at day camp I had to get emergency medical treatments and my kidneys or liver started shutting down. Story 28 was at the beach as a 10-year-old and went out on a boogie board. I was out with my brother and cousin and I slowly started drifting away from them the deeper we got, but I could still stand up. The moment I was floating on the boogie board, and I couldn't feel the sand beneath me, I knew the current was taking me, and this was the exact moment I realized I could not swim, yelled and waved until the lifeguard came and got me. Scariest moment of my life. Story 29. When I was 5, my appendix ruptured. Mom thought it was a stomach ache and ignored it, complained it was sore. She took me to the hospital. Surgeon said if she has waited 30 minutes longer I would have died. Story 30. Body surfing near Lae on Oahu on an overcast day in gale warnings. Went over the falls and expected to be pushed to the sand below and held down for a few seconds before the wave passed and I could push off to get to the surface. Instead, the rip from the previous returning wave was so strong the wave crashing over me pushed me into this reverse current, which held me above the bottom, knocked my wind out, spun my body around and ripped my fins off. When the waves passed, I was somewhere between surface and bottom in about 12 of water, with no idea which way was up. The overcast and disturbed silty water obscured any reference, and I had no air. I blindly started swimming in a random direction, and right as I felt I was going to inhale seawater, I glanced off of the bottom, quickly oriented myself, and double-leg pushed myself directly upward to get to air. Story 31. I should have died multiple times. Let me explain. First, when I was 11 I didn't yet know how to swim, still don't, but my uncle told me that if you find yourself in a situation where you have to swim, you'll learn. So I went to the city pool, hung onto the edge of the pool as I made my way to the 12-foot section, and then pushed away from the ledge and sunk. I was at the bottom for quite a while, and I remember thinking, oh well, I had a good run. Then I magically floated to the top, but I was too far away from the ledge to grab it and sunk back down. At that point I was convinced I was dead. By some stroke of luck or higher power, I floated back up and was able to grab the ledge. I got the out of there and went home and never got back in a pool again. My other occurrence that should have killed me was when I stuck these tiny metal scissors into the light socket because my older brother told me it would cause all the lights in the house to go off. I didn't believe him. Needless to say, it could have and probably should have made my lights go off. And finally, growing up I had this junky old bike that had metal handlebars and no grips on them. Well, one summer evening I was riding really fast through this field next to my house and hit a huge bump and crashed. One side of the metal handlebars scraped along my neck up to my cheek. Realistically, that metal handlebar should have went into my throat, but didn't. All of this is to say that I'm sure someone is looking out for me or I have extreme good luck. Story 32. Flipped a 78 Toyota Celica 3 times and landed upside down in a soybean field. Cracked my skull, tore the membrane covering the brain, spinal fluid leaking out. Kidneys shut down. Got a couple of weeks at UAB trauma ward. That's where I started drinking coffee. I was 15, still got the scar on my earlobe. Story 33. Mother tried to stab me in the neck with a knife, and then tried strangling me in another instance. I didn't know any self-defense so it was scary, but flailing all limbs seems to work really well. Story 34. I didn't actually almost die, but this situation could have gone way worse. I was bitten by a raccoon when I was 7 or 8. It was in a trap, and my family had told me not to touch it, but I poked it, but when no one was looking it whipped around and bit my finger. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid of getting in trouble for touching it after being told not to. If it had been rabid, I would have died. Story 35. Thought I was cool, so I took my armbands off, sat on the pool steps and went down step by step until I slipped and accepted I was drowning. After what felt like forever, 2 arms entered the water and pulled me out. Cheers, Dad. Story 36. Drowning. Went tubing in the river with friends, got pulled under a bunch of branches and couldn't get to the surface. My friend Chris saw me, swam back and got me out. Story 37. As a kid, I was running around the Christmas tree lot and ran into an exposed nail. It pierced me right in my forehead just above the middle of my eyebrows and blood started gushing out. Story 38. 0 years old, born a month premature and with a hole in my heart. 5 years old, fell off a boat in the middle of the night whilst everyone was asleep. 7 years old, got mauled by 2 dogs. 8 years old, got hit by a car going 30 miles per hour. 10 years old, appendix burst and I went into septic shock. 12 years old, got dragged out to sea in a riptide plus many more brushes with death as an adult. Story 39. Around 8 or 9 years old, the neighbor kid pulled a gun on me. His dad was a cop and had several guns but kept them locked up. Dude had 2 of those massive closet-sized safes. Somehow his son got a hold of a revolver of sorts and pulled it out to show me. Except showing me was him pointing it right at me and saying, "Hey, look at this." It was terrifying. I remember thinking I was about to be a statistic, that this guy was about to kill me and that would be it. Didn't really hang out with him much after that. Story 40. No one's probably gonna see, but I love telling this story. When I was 8 I had a family reunion and my cousins didn't like me all that well. I was scared of a lot and I was just a lot. I probably have some undiagnosed condition, but we went to a water park and there was a giant wave pool. My cousins and siblings went to the end of the wave pool, the deep end, and I wanted to be cool so I tried to go too. I also had no one to play with since I was the third youngest, but the second youngest was in the deep end and my younger cousin was just being weird, I don't know, just splashing in the shallow end. Now I can't swim, and I still can't, but I started walking on the platform to the shallow end. A lifeguard warned me not to go too far unless I can swim, and I kept going. I didn't want to listen to this lady, so I went all the way to the deep end and the waves turned on. I was already drowning, but the waves made it worse. But Mama didn't raise no, so I kept going and I eventually drowned, and I never screamed for help. I don't remember how I got out, either that lifeguard pulled me out or my big sister did. Another time I almost drowned was in 5th grade in a camping field trip. I swam in the lake, I simply got a cramp and screamed for help. A boy in my class got me and I was fine. Story 41. When I was 9 years old, I played in the well formed by a water supply company project in the middle of a desolate forest near my house, where I used to wander alone every day after school. I was floating on my back in the water, eyes closed, when I heard the ch-boom of someone jumping into the water. Before I could see anything, I was pulled out of the water with a by my neck and suspended in the air. I passed out. I woke up still suspended by the neck, being raped, dizzy and not breathing properly. I tried to pull the man's arm, who choked me again, causing me to faint again. With no idea of time, I woke up again but remained quiet until the man finished the act. That's when he threw me into the water like a bag of manure. As I fell, I stayed, holding my breath until I heard him run out of the water and speed away through the woods on a bicycle. I didn't see the bike, I didn't see anything about the man. I don't even remember if I saw the arm that was choking me. I just washed, looked for my shorts that were floating out there and went home crying, but I never told anyone about it. I escaped drowning and ending up buried there without anyone seeing, but I would have been beaten to death by my father if he had known. Story 42. Diphtheria, drowning, freezing, car accident. I still can't swim very well, but at least I won't drown in a pool. Growing up Gen X was interesting. Story 43. Melted a pair of tweezers in a wall outlet as a 3-year-old. The whole world retreated and I got this weird distant feeling. Walked out into the living room holding the smoking glowing metal stub, with my hair standing on end. My mom found me and I told her I was pretty sure I did something wrong. Story 44. On a family road trip in the early 60s, while traveling to Texas on Route 66, my dad was seemingly in a hurry to get there. Although there was no real hurry, he was driving a little fast and passing just about every car we came up to, one lane in each direction. My mother kept asking Dad to slow down. We're not in a hurry. Well, on one ill-advised passing of a slower car, we entered the opposing lane to pass and immediately saw a rapidly approaching car. Mom went into a panic, and before we had time to take another breath, we were ready to have a head-on crash with the opposing vehicle. At the last possible second, Dad swerved back into our lane and the cars missed each other's front bumpers by what looked like about 5 feet. 5 feet at a combined speed of around 130 miles per hour. I had been looking out my window and could see the panic-stricken face of the driver in the other car. Mom was beside herself with fright and anger. I think she also began sobbing. This was especially upsetting to Mom because she had been urging Dad to slow down and not be in such a hurry, requests that Dad ignored. We easily could have been another ugly highway statistic. Along with the innocent driver of the other car, this was not the only concerning behavior from Dad on that trip. Frankly, I would not have blamed Mom at all if she had ever decided to leave Dad, but they made it for 40 years until Mom succumbed to cancer. Story 45. How weird it sounds. I was sleeping and in my dream I was playing with a plastic bag polythene. I was wearing it like a mask, and suddenly all the air went out and I couldn't breathe, like I almost died, and I woke up from the sleep and it felt like I was about to die. I breathed so heavily for a few minutes and came back to normal breathing. The dream felt so real at the part of choking that I felt almost like dying in reality. Story 46. Strep in the blood. When sepsis with pneumonia, I was 5 or 6. Didn't leave the hospital for almost a week. Took a long time to recover. Luckily, I don't really remember much. Story 47. I choked on a whole hot dog. I remember my mother giving me the Heimlich in the laundry room. I also got lost in the woods for 5 hours at night. I was lucky enough to come upon a lonesome house in those woods. Thankfully, it was a bunch of frat girls having a party. Story 48. It wasn't because of the pandemic, but I was very depressed at the time, and I almost committed suicide a few times between the ages of 15 and 18. Story 49. Rattlesnakes. Yes, multiple. As a kid we didn't have much to do where from, so me and my brother started catching rattlesnakes and bringing them home. We were 10 and 12 years old and probably brought home 15 a year. Not sure why my parents didn't mind this, but... Story 50. Walking around on the back deck while the railing was being fixed. Walked off the edge and fell into a tomato garden. Landed right between 2 support spikes. Would have skewered me otherwise. 2 years old. Story 51. Wrapped up head to toe in a tight bed sheet like a shroud and sat on by a 300-pound social worker in an abusive therapist's office. The attachment therapy scene was a scary place for adopted and foster kids in the Pacific Northwest in the 1980s to 1990s, like a psychology Wild West frontier. There were people practicing therapy without licenses, new and dangerous therapies and treatments for little kids who were vulnerable and without advocates. I had several terrifying experiences there, but that one was almost the end for me. Several other kids weren't so lucky and died that way by suffocation. Story 52. Drunk driver was speeding and lost control of their stolen car, plowed through the room I was sleeping in. Books, glass and metal frames flew over me, bounced off the wall and ended up in the kitchen. Went to Astroworld the next day on a school field trip and spent the whole time wandering around alone. can't do that nowadays. Story 53. I was initially admitted to hospital following an unknown illness that affected a large number of kids in my classroom, several of whom were admitted as well. While admitted, I was mistakenly given potassium in my forebag which caused a seizure and maybe could have killed me. Story 54. When I was 4 to 5 years old we were all hanging out at the river. I was playing in an inner tube that was tied to the bank so it wouldn't float away. One of the adults just happened to glance over at me right before the alligator got to me. I never saw the gator, but did see everyone running into the water to get me. I was almost lunch. Story 55. Gen X here. While I could swim before I could walk, that does not help at all while falling out of trees, getting stepped on by cows and horses, setting myself on fire or sledding down a steep hill with the occasional tree on it. Story 56. Neighbor kid decided to come over and hold my head underwater in our inflatable pool. A car saw my flailing, stopped, and the driver ripped him off me. Story 57. We lived in a very rural area in northern Canada. The winters were rough. Mum was a drinker and a risk taker. While driving home one night, in the middle of a blizzard, she lost sight of the road, likely due to the booze and the blinding snow. She had the bright idea to put me on the hood of the car and point left or right so as to avoid the ditches on that old gravel road. Couple really close calls with trucks coming from the other direction. No idea how we made it home in one piece. I was 7. Story 58. There was this pool. I was on a cruise ship. It was all deep end, no shallow end or bars to hold on to. I slipped and lost my balance, and my sister was right beside me but couldn't help me because she couldn't swim, so she just sat and watched me drown. This kid from my kids club, I remember his name is Callum, jumped in and saved me. My mum did nothing. The lifeguard did nothing. Makes me laugh now that I think about it. Story 59. We used plastic straws for drinking our milk from the small cartons. After lunch one day I decided for some odd reason to keep the straw and keep sucking on it. I went out for recess to play touch football but I fell on a kid's back and the straw almost cut off one of my tonsils and missed my aorta by a quarter inch. I was rushed to the hospital by ambulance for surgery. I lost a lot of blood and almost died. Story 60. Appendix ruptured while out at a mall with parents and grandparents. I remember puking in a garbage can next to Cookie Factory. They took me to the hospital, after stopping at another mall, where I remember laying on the floor of Sears clutching my guts. Story 61. I was pulled out 500 feet to sea by undertow in Ocean City, New Jersey. I was 10 or 11 years old and my dad had taught me how to body surf the waves and I loved it. I had just rode a huge wave that broke super roughly and sent me under the water really hard. When I stood up, I was immediately met with a full force wave that completely knocked me off my feet and underwater again. I remember wave after wave crashing into me and forcing my body to violently spin while I was just trying to gasp for air and orient myself. While it was happening, I remember thinking that it was scary not being able to breathe when I wanted to, but getting thrown around like that was kind of fun. When I was finally able to reach the surface, I saw nothing but ocean in front of me. I realized I couldn't touch the sand under my feet. I turned around and saw the beach far away enough that the people looked as small as ants. I probably let out the loudest and most high-pitched scream of my entire life. I didn't see anything happening immediately so I started to freak out. I was sure I was going to die. No way a lifeguard would be able to swim to me in time. I couldn't see anything happening on land, so I didn't even think they heard me scream. A higher power must have been watching over me, because as soon the realization that I might actually die hit me, I felt a large hairy arm reach around my neck and grab me under my armpit. An older man, a retired firefighter, had been swimming laps far out to sea, past the levees, and heard me scream. I remember him asking if I could swim, but I couldn't answer because I was getting dunked with every stroke of his arms because of the way he was holding me. I barely managed to say I can't breathe. While gargling water and gasping for air, after a couple of minutes we reached a lifeguard in the water. By that point we were shallow enough that I could stand, but I clearly remember the lifeguard picking me up and holding me in one hand like a dinner platter to carry me over to my dad and handing me to him. My dad wrapped me in a towel and put his arm around me while we silently stared out to the sea for a little while. To the man who pulled me to shore that day, you saved my life. I wish I knew your name so I could properly thank you. I'm not scared of water or the ocean, but I learned how merciless it can be, and I will never forget how I felt when I turned around in the water that day. Story 62. We were playing beside a raging mountain river in Vermont in the winter. My cousin slipped down the bank and was hanging onto a tree. We were maybe 12. Early 80s. Did I go get an adult? No, I chipped handholds into the ice down to her. We were almost to the top when I slipped. A small bunch of birk trees saved we never told anyone. Story 63. Dove into a creek, small river head first. I hit my head on the rocks and fortunately slid off. Another kid looked at me in horror. I cut my head and combined with the water made me look like a mess. Worst part was that I wasn't able to go tubing down the river. Story 64. Decided at like 2.5 I could swim. Jumped into the pool. I would have drowned if my mother didn't sense something was wrong and jumped in to get me. Story 65. Almost drowned. Swimming with my friend out to a platform on a lake. I didn't know it, but my dad decided to get in a rowboat and follow us. Lucky for me, I was floating face down having given up and he plucked me from the water. Story 66. After moving to Texas, my parents' friends invited us to go tubing. Unbeknownst to my parents, due to heavy rains the engineers started releasing water from the dam. The rapids were crazy for a 10 to 12-year-old. I flipped over and was headed towards a waterfall. My mom was next to me somehow and grabbed me after I flipped over. I hung onto her tube and we were able to paddle with our hands to some trees. This was in a calmer section. We hung onto the trees fighting the current for about 30 minutes shouting for help, but the roar of the water was louder than our voices. Eventually some guys in their 20-30s were walking along the edge, spotted us and pulled us out of the water.